fooled me once. Shame on you. It fooled me. We can't get fooled again.
Welcome, everyone, to Reframing the Narrative, Episode 8, Starting Points for Discussion. Glad to be back with everyone. This week is just DJ and myself, once again, the dynamic duo. And I'm really excited to have just previewed with DJ my first video for the Central Texas Rabbit Hole. And as the title of this episode implies, it really is a starting point for people who may be newer in their journey of seeking the truth and understanding the people behind the curtain pulling the strings. And it's really just kind of an overview of some of the what I call the key pillars of the conspiracy world. DJ, love to get your first impressions, and we can kind of take it from there.
Well, first of all, I know editing is not that easy, and I think you did a great job with that. It flows really nicely. And just from a technical standpoint, I thought the addition of the music was really good. You made really good song selections and kept everything grooving away. And I was laughing at some of them, like the Daryl Hall and John Oates and things like that. I think this is like a really nice, bite-sized, maybe a little full helping, but still digestible helping of maybe something similar to what James Corbett did with his 9/11 doesn't really add up in 5 minutes.
19 men armed with box cutters, directed by a man on dialysis in a cave fortress halfway around the world, using a satellite phone and a laptop, directed the most sophisticated penetration of the most heavily defended airspace in the world.
This is kind of like a big overview, not just encompassing 9/11, but a whole bunch of things that when you look at them in our world don't really add up. And I'd like to get your take on why you think that's important and what motivated you to put this all together.
Yeah, well, I just think about my journey and the stages it's taken, and some of those really pivotal moments, like realizing that the story for 9/11 had a lot of holes in it, and there was motivation or multiple motivations for that event to have taken place the way it did and everything that followed. And, you know, even fast forwarding to 2020, and that was a reawakening for myself and an awakening for a number of people just straight away. And, you know, there's many, and we've talked about this a little bit in our past episodes, there's many points along the way where you come to certain realizations, and you have to choose, like, am I going to ignore that? Am I going to make something up in my mind to pretend it doesn't exist, or am I going to dig deeper and understand it fully? And then also too, how does that connect with all the other things that I've learned so far? And is there some common thread between them? That's something we all have to face and determine for ourselves. So my intention with this first video was really, let me set the framework for what are the key points that I think people need to come to grips with on their own terms. And, you know, we can even look at something like a 9/11, and, you and I talked about off air that, like, there's a lot of ways people have looked at that, and they have their theories on, you know, exactly how the towers fell and all that. And does it specifically matter? Not really when you think about the overall big picture, but there are some of us who like to dig into those details and kind of understand them at another level. But, you know, everyone's at a different place with all that.
Yeah, I think what really matters is if you trust your gut. We're given this power of discernment. It's no mistake that I really stress discernment. That's how I got my name. I think it's so important, especially facing all the deceptions out there. If you just discern, trusting your gut, that there's something wrong or what we're being told doesn't add up, that's what really matters. And then where do you go from there is the big question. How do you handle the truth as you see it, or even handle knowing that the truth could be unknowable, but that we're just being lied to and we're being sold a bill of goods. I think there's mass gaslighting on the biggest scale ever when we get to what all this deception really amounts to. I didn't even understand the term gaslighting until, CV19. It was just so in your face. And it took me probably a few months of just hearing that term over and over. I'm like, okay, now I have a very clear picture of what gaslighting looks like. And in your video, you show a lot of basically the symbology, kind of the gang signs that people that might be deceiving us share, and they like to flash at us, and they like to put in their movies or in their media and in their speeches, their handshakes, what they wear, everything like that. And on some level, it occurred to me as I was watching, it's really kind of gaslighting. I never really thought of it that way before, but they're telling you in so many ways what they're doing. And then overtly, they're saying, we're not doing that. Climate change is real. There really is a virus. The Soviet Union really wants to nuke you. Get under your desk now. Duck and cover, all that kind of stuff. I think one thing we could add to that list is the Cold War. And going back to one of our previous episodes, how fear is really sold to us in this world. And when you buy into the fear, what do you do with it? How does that make you respond? It puts you on your heels. It keeps you up at night. It makes you do things that really are against your best interests in a lot of ways, and really just keeps you on the plantation. We've been sold so many of these deceptions that, in my view, if you really take a closer look, they might not even be a thing. Like nukes, the threat of nukes during the Cold War. I grew up during the Cold War. The whole germ theory thing, climate change, a lot of these things, it's such gaslighting on such an extraordinary monumental level. When you look at it, there might not even be a there, and it's just all a game. But it becomes real when we manifest that fear in our behavior.
Couldn't agree more. And actually, that is one of the traps that I've seen people on the truth journey fall into, is what they call the black pill, that you start realizing that there's so much deception and so much darkness in the world, and you just give up, and you're like, oh, well, it's all going to hell anyway. And, a lot of people take a very negative stance on things, or even let it become a divisive point against others. I remember seeing that even in 2020, when it kind of turned into us versus them, and it should have always been us and us versus the people pulling the strings. And that's also part of the reason that I put some might call it a religious angle towards the end of it, but I'm paraphrasing that. I don't know if it was like Neil deGrasse Tyson or whoever it was who once popularized, it doesn't matter if you believe in science because it's a fact or something like that. The reason I bring that up is because you may not believe that there's such thing as Satan and the devil, and that, it's all just a big made up fairy tale, but it's like, well, that's fine. But you know what? The people who are in control and in positions of power or have fame and money, they're all giving their salute to it, and they're all acknowledging it in some way. So, I think it's just people need to realize that the world we live in is multidimensional, and ultimately there is a source of light and a source of truth. And when you get to that part of your truth journey, then you can take a step back from a lot of what you see in the world and go, okay, I can choose whether or not to participate, but I'm not going to let it consume me or drive me with fear or, make me hate others or anything like that. So I just thought it was really important to link kind of what you see at the beginning of that video with the secret handshakes and signs that ultimately have a darker purpose, to the other side of the equation, the more powerful side, which is the light and the truth, and some realities that many of us are even just coming to understand in terms of, our potential past history that was covered over and things of that nature. So I just think it's really important to kind of put a lot of this in context and have the right foundation for dealing with it.
It's kind of a burden if you take on this kind of knowledge. You're getting yourself into some powerful stuff, and it can really be demoralizing. I don't know if you're familiar with Yuri Bezmenov's video from I believe the early to mid 80s. He did an interview and he goes into the stages of how basically America will be taken over. And the first stage is demoralization. What does demoralization mean? It means it really is lack of a moral compass, and it's also despair. And I would say being black-pilled, it really suits that description. I would give credit to Mark Passio on all his many presentations, but most recently on Tinfoil Hat, where he explained that moral relativism is a key tenet of Satanism, because it really is a rejection of the natural order given by God and natural law given by God. Then we get into essentially the human veneer that's put on to everything, and really the physical realm, and that these people really do kind of rule over us. But it's, in a way, sometimes I think, like I was hinting at, it's all kind of just like a projection on the cave wall that we're seeing. And we don't necessarily have to buy fully into all the fear. It is kind of a difficult journey. And like you said at the beginning, it's a very personal and sometimes very lonely journey. So it's nice to know that others are on it as well, and to find other truth seekers. And I think it's okay when we don't agree to know that people are just doing their best. They're just trying to discern, and not everyone's going to agree at every point. And so we can be like Reagan and Gorby when it comes down to that, and we can put aside our differences.
Well, we definitely know that both of those guys were in the same club anyway, and it's all just, I'm going to borrow Paul Hobbs' term that he came up with a month or two ago. It's all Masonic theater, but that being said, I get your point, and it's unfortunate that there are people who take such a dogged stance on some of the hows and some of these conspiracies or world events. And I think of a perfect example of the 9/11 for Truth organization. The people that are in that and some of their associates or close friends have attacked Dr. Judy Wood viciously for what she's, investigated and learned. And there's a real divisiveness in the 9/11 conspiracy world around that. I think Dr. Judy Wood has done great work and shown that a lot of the explanations are not possible. And you can actually find that video of Where Do the Towers Go, where she's presenting that on YouTube. I actually just got the book, and I'm excited to read it. It's a thick book, as you might imagine, for the type of investigations that she's done. But all that being said, we should be on the same team and not like getting into pissing matches about, was it detonation or was it energy weapons? Who knows, right? I think she makes a pretty strong case for energy weapons being involved. But at the end of the day, the picture is much bigger than that. And the other point I wanted to make too, kind of along the lines of Masonic theater, is some of the faces that I put in the early part about showing the people who are in the club was intentional, because I've heard from some people in the truth community that they think, oh, well, that musician or that person, they were on our side. They just maybe got mixed up in the wrong crowd, but they were, they had the right intentions all along. And, sometimes it's hard to change people's minds. And I'm hoping with some of those faces that showed up, they can see that they were still part of the club. And, whether they put on a certain air of being on their side or good guys, that definitely is not the case. The same goes for politicians and people that a lot of the people in the alternative community rally around. My favorite is RFK because he's clearly a fake hero, and that's probably going to ruffle a few feathers. But it's true. Like they, as the famous George Carlin clip that I included says, it's a big club and you ain't in it.
Yeah, and we're never going to be in it. Those of us that are talking together right now and listening to this, deal with it. We're not in the club, but we do have our own club, and that is the club of greater humanity and people seeking the truth. And that's a much more dignified and glorious club to belong to. So, don't hang your head at not being in the club that George Carlin's talking about. We have some work to do. It's not just about hanging online, watching different platforms, and really kind of playing into this whole digital prison that they're building. We've built so many digital platforms and communities in the virtual world over the years, and I can really see everything coming together, being herded into these digital silos or worse. And it's really important to have real relationships with real people. Those are great online. It's wonderful. You moved out of state and we're still in touch. We're able to do this show together, but we need people to be on the ground, and we need allies who are going to, knock on each other's door with a bowl of fruit or something when things get bad, or even if they don't get bad, just check in on each other. And we need those real relationships, because the virtual world is part of that potential prison that they've constructed for us. Just think of the term digital, right? Digital means with your fingers, your hands. It's built by human hands. That's what they are doing. That realization, when I just reflected on that term digital, really hit me hard. Like, whoa, that's really, hand built, not just ones and zeros, right? Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, you hinted to more to come. So this is your work as PJ from the Central Texas Rabbit Hole, and I know you have a whole community on Telegram there as well. What do people that maybe have viewed your video and seen this overview have to look forward to as far as coming attractions? Where do you plan to take this, and how in depth are you going to go with this kind of material?
That's a great question, and I've spent so many hours putting this first one together that I think I have to take a breather and wait for a little inspiration. But I can say that one content creator who I've gotten into in the past few days, and I learned about him from an interview that Paul from Understanding Conspiracy had recently. There's a content creator called Flat Bear. The E is it's a 3, backwards 3 instead of an E. But that gentleman, he does videos that are typically like 2 minutes long, and he kind of gets the best bits from like podcasts or different presentations or videos, and he just kind of packages them into a very salient point about something in particular. And I think that I'd like to do something more in that direction. I put a lot of effort into creating a framework in this video, and it's much longer than I ever hoped to really try to tackle again. But that being said, I did have a talk with another fellow traveler in the Bay Area that you and I know very well, and hopefully we'll have on our show in the near future. And towards the end of our conversation last night, catching up, she had brought up kind of how her and I had bonded back in the day, and we talked about the video, what on earth happened, and how that started changing my mind about a lot of things. And maybe if I try to go do a really deep dive again, I'll go watch the 8 hours of that and see if I can turn that into something 15 minutes or less, or no more than a half an hour. But that's, just like I spent a fair amount of time combing through the Attilian Child's video, the World's Secret Religion. There's so much great stuff in that, but that's 5.5 hours, and most people just are not willing to invest that time. And same for the famous Ewarnon, What on Earth Happened, and his follow-up, Lost History of Flat Earth. There's so much good stuff there, but is there a way to condense that for people? That's the type of challenge I'd like to take on. But I do want to, before I get off of this point, you had brought up about our group or our club or whatever you want to call it is much better than the club that, the people who show the gang signs to, pledge their allegiance to the darkness of the world. My favorite Flat Bear video that I've seen so far is like a 2.5-minute video, I think, and it's called You Are the Elite. So I believe it was Owen Benjamin who he borrowed a voiceover from in this particular video, where he's talking about, if you're able to see through all these deceptions and understand that, the world is not the world that you were told, and that you can see through a lot of these big lies. He's like, you are the elite. And, basically it was communicating, you have a special place to be able to even see and understand a lot of things the majority of people don't. And, to not really let those who are, at least on paper, in control, don't be envious of them. Don't let them get you down, because it's like, you've been given the gift of sight, and it's something very special that most people don't have the ability to handle or the desire to take on.
That's a really important point. And I'll add that I saw somewhere, and I think it was really mainstream, like a Harvard study or maybe Cambridge or something, but it was talking about like 80% of people do not have an internal dialogue, something like that. And that brings us to the whole idea of self-reflection and having eyes to see. And it really is a gift. And I don't think we should poo-poo the ability to discern. And even on small levels, we can take action and we can allow that to steer us on a truer course. And sometimes we don't always know the destination, but when we sense a deception or a trap, we can avoid it, or we can sometimes be proactive and do something about it. So on levels small and large, it's really important to be on this journey, and you don't have to have a monopoly over what is real or the truth. And going back to what I said about trusting your gut, really, that's what's really important. And I think a lot of people who, there's a meme on the internet all over the place that's like, nobody ever regretted not getting the pokey poke, right? So like that discernment that people exercised at that point, that could have saved their lives. And you can't overlook that, and you can't poo-poo that. That's one example. Like if your gut tells you something is amiss and you see Dr. Fauci up there doing the hidden hand, and that's what speaks to you and says, wait a minute, maybe I'll just hold off on this. And then you learn further about what really promotes true health and the power of the body, and go beyond that. I mean, that whole deception has really been a gift to me personally, because it's put me on a whole different course towards what is truer health and trusting God's design, trusting my body, the power of my body, the power of natural healing, things like that. So don't sell yourself short when it comes to discernment and making little decisions and big decisions. You just never know when they're going to come up.
Hear, hear. And, even just putting some of the content together, the one thing that I learned in creating a video, which you and others who have done this before, I know are very familiar, but it's, you come up with a script, you put your audio down, and then all of a sudden you're like, well, I don't have enough video now to cover my audio. And so you have to go find some other B-roll or content. And, as I was pulling a lot of that together for 2020 and just looking at look at what happened to the world and look at the empty streets, and then fast forward to 2021 and look at the people dropping over. And then, you spoke of earlier about gaslighting and, the media trying to tell you that what you're seeing is not actually happening, right? Like people are not falling over and dying at an unusually young age. And, even one of my favorite famous people examples is Taylor Hawkins, the drummer from Foo Fighters. And everyone knows that he was coerced and He suddenly dies of a heart attack, and, they immediately go to, it was a drug overdose, and there's a lot of questions around that happening. But all that is to say that, you do have a choice in this matter. And, if you want to risk your life and your life beyond even to make those choices and to say, okay, I'll go along with this agenda, even though part of me says that it might not be the best choice. Well, that is your choice. And that is one thing that I do fully believe is we've got free will, and we have free will to make good choices and choices that lead to life here in the next world, and also the opposite. And if you're chasing after the things that ultimately lead to death and destruction, that's, God gave you that choice, and that's really up to you. So, I just think that, going back to discernment and thinking about, if there was that part of you that said, this doesn't feel right, and why are they trying to force me into this decision? That's probably enough as like, maybe I need to, rethink this. We did see a lot of people stand up and say no, but by far not enough. And that's just where I think that it has real life consequences, when you choose to participate or not in some of these things.
Absolutely. And I think one trap that some people can fall into when it comes to looking at people that maybe do follow along is that sometimes they feel like they're the elite in a different way, like I'm smarter than you or better than you. But it's taken me a long time and a lot of actual self work to kind of overcome that. The guy I've mentioned before rolled down the window and yelled at people for wearing a mask outside. And it's just important to really exercise compassion and practice compassion when other people are not necessarily on the same journey as you, or they can't see what you can see. Maybe that's not going to happen. That's not their fate in this life. Maybe their eyes will never open, but they might be a great mom. They might be, a great uncle or a great inventor, or maybe just, they made their mom and dad happy, something like that. Those of us that end up on this kind of a quest, I hate the word journey, so I'm going to avoid it, but I mention it anyway. Just realize that everyone's quest is individual, and there are lots of allies that are there along with us, but we're going at our own pace, on our own level. We're in different spaces at the same time. And what really matters is that discernment, that we practice that and we honor our gifts. And I really do believe that like 95% of the population these days are NPCs. So if you go on the comments on things like what's in the news right now, they're saying that there's a measles outbreak in Texas where you are. And it's horrific. And the headlines are saying unvaccinated child dies of measles. And you go on the comments expecting people to call this out and say, they're doing it again. They're drumming up the fear. I didn't see a single comment on YouTube in the last couple of days to that effect. Nobody was on, team truth seeker in this case. It's such an easy thing to do. How dare those parents? They're such failures. They're terrible. It's the same thing we're seeing. You kill grandma. I pity those people that have that fear of measles and are sticking needles all over the place. In the end, we're on the same team because we're not on, the big team that's really pulling off all these shenanigans on us. But it's hard to remind ourselves of that because it's easy to get riled up and want to fight them. And these days, I just remind myself, you're not going to get anywhere bringing this stuff up. Ask questions. That's really the Socratic method when it comes down to is much more effective. So use your time wisely online, especially.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I've wasted a lot of time in the past trying to argue with people who have no intention of seeing. And it's like, you can maybe plant seeds, or as you say, use a Socratic method of asking questions. But if they don't, if they've got their mind made up and they're not intent on hearing the other side, then it's just a waste of your time. And there's so many better things to do with the time that you do have. But I do want to kind of go back to your point about it being a gift. And, I don't consider myself any better or different than anyone else. It just, I feel like I was given that gift to see. And I think that was in that video that I mentioned by Flat Bear, that it's like, when he said you're the lead, it's like you've been given this gift to see and you should use it wisely. And, just understand that, like, you don't have to be envious of the people who pull the strings in the world and are called the elite, because they're not really the elite. And, so, I mean, and I agree that, there's so many things that I've fallen for in the past and, eventually saw my way out of. So I do agree, you have to have sympathy for people who are falling into these traps. And, even people in the alternative community, I see people who, get a certain level of progression and they just kind of go into the ditch and they're happy with the rest of the lies. They knew enough to, not get poked, and that was it. But, they'll still fight you on some of the other deceptions in the world. And,
lab leak.
Yeah. So, I've seen it time and time over again. And as you said, everyone's on a different, quest.
What is your quest?
Everyone's quest is different and has a different timing. And, I think that whether people fully see is really up to them. But I think if they've been at least given the option of kind of seeing behind the curtain, then it's really up to them to go, well, how far do I want to go? And how brave do I want to be? Do I want to be that character in the Truman Show and get out of the boat and eventually walk up the stairs? Not everyone's there or wants to be there. But yeah, I just, wanted to comment there that, everyone, I think, is given an equal shot in this life. And, everyone, I'd like to think everyone has the opportunity to see the truth on some level, but it's really hard to say. But certainly I think we're all on many levels put here on equal footing. So I don't consider myself better than anyone else. And definitely I've seen that where people get to a certain level of understanding and then they kind of use it as an ego thing. And that's not what it's all about.
Yeah, I can think of a lot of examples of that, and it's just off-putting. And we don't really want to be the self-selected elite, right? We're countering that. We're a contrast to that, because we see what that elitism is doing. It makes you able to turn people into the other that needs to be marginalized and attacked. And they play that game on us, and they make us do the same thing, where they impel us to do that. They don't make us do it, because we really do have a sense of discernment and we do have free will. And it's really up to us to remind ourselves that, no, this person isn't my enemy because of whatever it is. And so we should never look to be the elite just because we are fortunate enough not to be led along certain deceptive paths.
Absolutely. So, what I guess it'd be worth discussing, DJ, what were some of your big pillars? Did I miss any from your point of view in trying to provide a framework for people who might be newer, or even just add something to the key pillars that, we've all become familiar with? Like, what were some of your big ones?
Well, I think the Cold War was a huge one. I think that if you look at history and the spark that ignites pretty much all wars has been sold just to get people to get on board. And so all wars are bankers' wars, or all wars are really just ways of forcing change that happens really quickly. It's a great accelerator of change and crisis as well. I think the report from Iron Mountain in the 60s, if you're familiar with that, they talk about the prospects of peace. And they say, well, conflict and war is really a great way to bring about change. And we prefer that. So we'll stick with Hegel because Hegel understood how to get people to respond in the way you want them to. So I would definitely touch on all wars, the deceptions with things like even the Cuban Missile Crisis or the Gulf of Tonkin with our friend Jim Morrison's dad, the admiral, reporting in that they'd been attacked when it never really happened. And then the whole Cold War, like I said, my father worked in the defense related industry throughout his career. And eventually, long after he retired, he looked at me once, probably across the dinner table, and he said, man, the whole Cold War was just a farce and it was fake. And if I was going to work for the bad guys, I should have just made a killing on Wall Street working for Goldman Sachs, because either way, he was working for the bad guys in a way. He was involved in the development of technology for companies that did defense contracting. And even he, who was, eyeballs deep in it for his entire career, he eventually was able to pull back and see, wow, we were just sold a bill of goods. And even now, just look at all the Russia, because it's just such a convenient foe to point to. And we never get the other side in our media. We never get to see an in-depth interview with anybody from Russia or we never saw anybody on the ground when they were looking for WMDs. What's it like to be an Iraqi these days? We never see that. And it's amazing how controlled the narrative is. So that's definitely something. All war being deception, and especially like the Cold War was a big one for me. Yeah, and there's plenty of other ones as well. I think terrorism is manufactured, even things like in the 90s, this whole scare about like you're going to get kidnapped, the milk carton kids, things like that, it could be tied into some of these satanic cults and the disappearance of children. And in a way, it plays into this whole hurting of everybody from the yards that we used to play in. The parents they'd see something on the news and they'd say, oh, John Bonet was, abducted from her basement when she had really good parents. Don't go play anymore. Don't go outside. And then Game Boy comes along, and then the internet comes along, and now we're all online and we're not playing outside. We're not getting the sun. We're not interacting with our peers, and we're not just practicing having fun and playing and learning skills at the same time. So there's so many deceptions out there, including little ones that we may not have reflected on like that, just like herding us into this virtual world one step at a time.
Wow, that's really deep. Honestly, I hadn't ever thought about it before, but that was just the tippy toe towards, totalitarianism. And gosh, wow. Now that you take a step back and you think about it, yeah, just a slow progression of getting people from outside in nature and interacting. And I remember when I grew up, people knew their neighbors and they talked to each other, and you at least knew the neighbor in, every direction from you. Maybe not a block away, but you knew everyone close to you, and it wasn't a big thing for you to run through the yard and, go talk to him or whatever. And you're right. Like, it was just that progression of things to get people afraid of their neighbor or people on the streets, and to kind of herd them indoors and then eventually online and into the digital prison. That's a really great observation that I hadn't thought about until just now. But another one, I'll take the step back. You were talking about wars, and I was watching a recent podcast. It might have been the Monday JT follows JC, the mixtape one. I think that's where they were talking about it. But recent podcast they had where he brought up war, and they were talking about, well, they hinted at some of the anomalies of World War II, and of course they were limited in what they could say on YouTube. But anyway, JT had said something to the effect of, have you really thought about wars and how just dumb of an idea it is, and how we've all been sold this idea that it's okay to go to someone's country and just kill innocent people? Like, we've just been conditioned to that's something you do. It's not like we're in feudal lands and we've got castles, if any of that was even real, and that's its own rabbit hole. But, if people lived in castles as, shown to us on TV and movies, if someone was invading your castle, then obviously you had to fight to keep them out and from, plundering and killing, or, even in a town or whatever. Like, I guess that aspect of war, if there was a real invasion, that sort of makes sense. But like this idea that I have a different political ideology than you, and I'm going to now just destroy all of your buildings and kill women, children, just people who are trying to make it day to day. Like, it just, none of that makes sense. And we've been conditioned that that's okay. And, this is just one of the many deceptions. And it's such a subtle one, because it's like war is in TV and movies and everything. And we're just like, it just is something that we're led to believe is okay.
Obviously, the first casualties of war are those that are either bystanders and are just perish, or the ones fighting it. And they're in some ways fortunate enough not to survive it, because those that survive, there's mass trauma that's inflicted on society. And I was listening to a recent podcast where that notion really dawned on me. And so in that the soldiers that were, let's say, fighting for the British Empire, they're not at home. They're out there, and they come back. And if they survive, maybe they have physical issues. Maybe they have what they used to call shell shock or PTSD, and they're changed forever. And they might be more vicious when they become cops. They might, have substance problems, and they're easier to use and exploit. They may treat their children poorly and their wives, their family poorly. But that also could lead to what we're seeing now, which is the progression of the state becoming mommy and daddy, because that was really what we saw in these world wars, especially men going off to war, or even before the world wars, like the British Empire, like I mentioned. There's no daddy at home. What does that do to the family? And maybe that was part of the mass experimentation that's been going on this planetary scale for longer than we might expect. It's been leading to this point. And we know what happens when children don't have a healthy family to raise them. And this could be part of it. And we saw that. And of course, the state gets the benefit of plundering resources and traumatizing its people, and the control that comes from that.
Yeah, I mean, agreed with everything you just said there. And it made me think, of a couple things, but just the last thought I had was, thinking about the orphan trains in the mid 1800s and the repopulation that we know happened after some type of reset. And I won't open that rabbit hole again, but I think where I come from in general on that. But, I wonder what did happen to the parents of those children. And, one possible explanation is shutter them away in the insane asylums, which definitely those buildings were not fit for purpose. If you're trying to stick crazy people away, you probably don't build something big and ornate when you're still supposedly in horse and buggies. But that being said, I wonder if there was some sort of other calling that, like, the children would be more malleable because they had no parents left, and they could be told a whole different story and put into factories, and everything that we know happened kind of at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. But certainly you made a good point there about what happens when the men go off to war and don't come home, and what happens to that family, and what happens to the society. I think it's a really good point. But one thing I didn't want to let go, you had mentioned, some of the people who are calling the shots or pulling the strings in wars, not actually participating. And I have to give a big shout out again to Agent 131711. He just put an article out about the George Washington Bible, and it got me reading a related article about the 1776 PSYOP. And one of the details, I'd read that once before, but one of the details in that article talks about, some of the so-called heroes of the American Revolution, one of them being John Hancock, who was actually a smuggler, and he had made many efforts to avoid ever paying taxes, yet, he was one of the people, involved in kind of the system and telling other people to go ahead and pay their taxes when, he had circumvented them the whole time. But, there's many tales of where he had sort of instigated some of these skirmishes or famous battles, and then he suddenly went missing every time, like he was off somewhere else, or, someone had convinced him to go into hiding or something at the last minute. And it's like, rules for thee and not for me type of situation. And, it definitely happens for the people who are sending people to war. It's like, it's not their lives. They don't care. Right.
Yeah. And I think it's a very important reminder to reflect that anybody that can potentially have the power to send people to war, they're capable of anything, right? Because they'll do that. Like, what president hasn't sent people into conflict in forever, right? And so it's just a reminder to me that this is the kind of person that seeks and obtains power. They're the kinds of people who will sign an order to send people's husbands, sons, and brothers and fathers to war. And they know very well what they're doing. And we do see signs that all wars are really based on deception. As well, Sun Tzu said that. Sun Tzu, people say Sun Tzu, but yeah, Sun Tzu. All wars deception. And so if they understand that, then they're able to justify going ahead and signing that order anyway, because to them, it's worth it for them, not necessarily for the rest of us. Yeah.
Here. That's a point I made about the Iraq wars, all those people killed, and, someone at the top was like, well, not my children, It
was Madeleine Albright, right? Who, during the interview, they said, what about the 500,000 Iraqi children? Was it worth it? And she said, looked in the camera, said,
I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it.
Yeah.
Cold-blooded killer. Well, yeah, this has been, another great discussion, and a lot of effort went into putting that video together. I'll definitely be releasing that, hopefully by tomorrow, Friday, when the viewers will see this, or if not by this weekend. But I definitely want to see people's comments, and it was really great getting your insight into what are some of the other pillars that have influenced not only our world but kind of how we view the world, and have looked past many of the deceptions, and really just where would someone want to get more information? Because, there's a lot of different directions and a lot of content creators out there too, but not everyone looks into the same rabbit hole, and there's many rabbit holes out there. So, just want to look for any inspiration if there's something that, somebody's particularly interested in. In the meantime, I'll just kind of wait to get that download of what I should do next. And, who knows? I haven't even looked into the headlines recently to see what's been going on with this stupid egg shortage, and all based on malarkey, as you and I have talked about in the past. And maybe I should, go into a little bit of that and how it relates to, a lot of other things, as you mentioned earlier about even the current measles outbreak, how all that's related to a bunch of nothing burgers, really. And, maybe I should do something on that, or, look into some of the people who foisted these ideas onto us in the first place, like Pasteur being one of them, and some of the dark, twisted stuff that happened in the name of science. So we'll see how things develop. I'm going to take a breath after doing all this and just see what comes. But my goal, just like this podcast, is to try to get something out at least weekly.
Content creation is definitely time and energy consuming. Just the preparation alone is definitely takes a lot, and then putting everything together and then releasing and trying to talk about it. They're all very elaborate, at least in my experience. I don't know. Some people just tend to be able to just wake up and barf out some really great content. And I have a personal topic or two that I'd like to get into. And I think maybe that's where we can also write about that stuff on Substack and share that. Maybe kind of give a preview on our Substack, which is Reframing the Narrative podcast on Substack. So look for that. And I think this would be a really great video for you also to just give a bit of a summary on Substack and then share the link there. So we can do that on our Substack as well. And where else can we find you and our podcast, BJ?
Well, all the usual places, and hopefully by the time this one comes out, you'll see our programming note on our respective channels. So the Central Texas Rabbit Hole on YouTube, as well as Discerning Jake on YouTube. But of course, we've got the Reframing the Narrative on YouTube as well. And we also have the Substack. We have a Rumble page as well. What am I missing, Jake?
Yeah, Rumble is Reframing the Narrative podcast at Rumble. And I'm actually pleasantly surprised with the view count there, considering that it's just out there. We'll interact with anybody that comments on any of these platforms. Just very honored, and don't take it for granted that if people are listening to us, we want to have something to say. We're not just infotainment. That's at least the goal I have in mind. I've been through that. The frogs are gay. So
I could see in the future Rumble being where we tackle some of the subjects that are wrongthink that can't be talked about on YouTube. So, maybe we have the extra good content over there. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So until next week, check out PJ's upcoming video at the Central Texas Rabbit Hole channel on YouTube, and come to our next podcast with something to reflect on as we move on to the next episode next week. Same time and same channel every Friday.
And definitely send us your comments about what you'd like us to cover, because both of us are always looking for inspiration. So definitely look forward to your input.
Yeah, appreciate you. See you next time.
You just have to flood a country's public square with enough raw sewage. You just have to raise enough questions, spread enough dirt, plant enough conspiracy theorizing that citizens no longer know what to believe.